My hands hadn't been working right since morning. I struggled to button my blouse, and the teacup kept slipping out of my uncooperative fingers. My joints were more inflamed than usual. The weather was disgusting. It had been raining in White House since yesterday, and the dampness penetrated to the bone even in a well-heated house. Arthritis began to bother me about 5 years ago, right after I turned 60. But in recent months, the pain had become unbearable. The morning stiffness didn't go away until lunchtime, and familiar tasks became a struggle. I dropped things more and more often, couldn't open a can of food, and yesterday I couldn't tie my shoelaces. At 10 o'clock, wrapped in an old wool coat, I slowly made my way down the street to the bus stop. I had an appointment with Dr. Alma Radley, a rheumatologist at the city hospital. We met once a month, and each time Dr. Radley shook her head and prescribed stronger painkillers. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and old magazines. I waited my turn, looking at the other patients. Many were much younger, and for some reason that made me feel uncomfortable, as if I were to blame for my age. "Mrs. Holloway, come in," the nurse called, and I struggled to get up from the plastic chair. Dr. Radley, a short woman with short gray hair, greeted me with a friendly smile. "How are we feeling today?" "Worse," I admitted honestly. "The painkillers aren't helping much." The doctor examined my hands carefully, noting the swollen red joints, performed a few mobility tests, and finally sat down at her desk to record the results. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm afraid we're going to have to revise your treatment plan," she said seriously. "The disease is progressing faster than we expected. If we don't take action now, you may soon lose mobility in some of your joints." My heart sank with fear. "What can we do?" "There is a new course of therapy," Dr. Radley said, handing me a glossy brochure. "It's a new generation of biological drugs. They are much more effective than traditional medications and can not only relieve symptoms but also slow the progression of the disease." I flipped through the brochure. The photos showed smiling elderly people playing with their grandchildren, gardening, and playing sports. "That sounds wonderful," I said hopefully. "But there's one problem." Dr. Radley took off her glasses and rubbed her nose. "These drugs are expensive, very expensive. Your insurance only covers a small portion of the cost." "How expensive?" My mouth went dry. When the doctor named the amount, I almost gasped. $20,000 for the full course. I didn't have that kind of money. "I understand that this is a serious expense," Dr. Radley said gently. "But believe me, the results are worth it. We have patients who have returned to normal life after this therapy." I nodded, trying to collect my thoughts. I had savings, about $15,000 that I had put aside for a rainy day. But it still wasn't enough. At home, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, looking at the brochure and trying to find a solution. I could take out a loan, but banks were reluctant to lend to pensioners. Sell something valuable? I had almost nothing except my house, and moving at my age seemed unthinkable. There was one option left: turn to my son. Mitch earned a good living at an insurance company. Of course, he had his own family, a mortgage, teenage children. But hadn't I helped him all my life so that I could count on his support in difficult times? I picked up the phone and dialed my son's number. My daughter-in-law answered. "Hello, Bertha." Cordelia's voice sounded cheerful. "How are you?" "So, dear. Is Mitch home?" "He's at work, but he should be back soon. Is something wrong?" "I need to talk to him. It's important." "Would you like me to ask him to call you back when he gets home?" "Yes, please. Or you know what? I'll come over tonight." That would be better. Her son's house was always noisy. Zoe, her 15-year-old granddaughter, was constantly listening to music. 13-year-old Flynn was playing video games, and Cordelia seemed to be cooking dinner, talking on the phone, and helping the kids with their homework all at the same time. Mitch usually showed up last, tired after work, and immediately settled into his favorite chair with a bottle of beer. This evening was no exception. I sat at the kitchen island watching my daughter-in-law bustle about, waiting for my son to be free. Finally, after dinner, when the children had gone to their rooms and Cordelia was doing the dishes, I had a chance to talk to Mitch alone. "Mom, you seem tense," he remarked, leaning back on the sofa. "Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath and began to tell him about my visit to the doctor, about the progressive arthritis, the risk of losing mobility, the new course of treatment that might help, but was expensive. Very expensive. 20,000? Mitch whistled. Wow. Doesn't insurance cover it? Only a small part of it. How much do you have saved up? About 15,000. I'm still 5,000 short. Mitch scratched his chin thoughtfully. Okay, Mom. I understand that this is serious. Let's think about how to solve this problem. He picked up his laptop and started typing quickly. Look, I found this. There are special co-financing programs for seniors with chronic illnesses. You might be able to get a grant for treatment. I looked at my son with gratitude. He had always been like that. Practical, quick to find solutions. There's another option, Mitch continued. You can transfer your savings to a joint account and I'll add the missing amount. That way, it will be easier to control your medical expenses. A joint account? I asked. Yes, in my name. I'll open it specifically for your treatment, keep track of all payments, and deposit money when needed. You won't have to worry about it. I hesitated. Transfer all my savings to my son? On the other hand, it was a family money, and Mitch had always been reliable. Besides, he would add the missing amount. Okay, I agreed. When can we do it? Let's do it tomorrow. I'll take the day off and we'll go to the bank together. The next day, Mitch picked me up early in the morning and we went to the bank. The process took about an hour. We had to fill out a lot of forms, sign documents, and verify our identities. Finally, all $15,000 were transferred to a new account opened in Mitch Holloway's name. That's it, he said as we left the bank. Now I'll take care of everything. Sign up for treatment, and I'll pay the bills directly. I felt relieved. For the first time in a long time, I had hoped that the pain would subside, that I would be able to hold knitting needles in my hands again, play with my grandchildren, and work in the garden. 2 days later, I called the clinic to sign up for treatment. We can start next week, the administrator said, but we need confirmation of payment. Of course, I'll ask my son to transfer the money. I immediately dialed Mitch's number, but the phone was unavailable. I decided he was busy at work and sent a message asking him to contact the clinic about the payment. There was no reply. In the evening, I tried calling my son again, but to no avail. Cordelia didn't answer either. This was strange. My daughter-in-law always answered the phone. I started to worry. Maybe something had happened? It wasn't until the next day, when I checked my social media page, which I had started at the insistence of my grandchildren, that I saw new photos on Cordelia's profile. They showed my son's family sunbathing on a white sandy beach, drinking cocktails by the pool, and riding jet skis. The geotag indicated the location. Paradise, Bahamas. I couldn't believe my eyes. I enlarged one of the photos where Mitch was smiling broadly and raising a glass of a bright drink. The date of publication was yesterday. With trembling hands, I dialed my son's number. After a few rings, he finally answered. Yes, Mom? The sound of waves and music could be heard in the background. Mitch, are you on vacation? I tried to speak calmly, even though my heart was beating like crazy. Oh, you saw the photos. Yeah, we decided to take a vacation. We've been planning it for a long time. But what about the money for your treatment? I called the clinic. They're waiting for payment. There was a pause. Then Mitch said in a matter-of-fact tone, Listen, Mom, we'll talk about this when I get back. Now's not the best time. When will you be back? I felt a lump rising in my throat. In 10 days. Don't worry so much. A couple of weeks won't make any difference. Mitch, I tried with all my might not to cry out. You spent my money on a vacation? The money that was set aside for my treatment? Another pause. Then Mitch spoke, his voice sounding irritated. You know what, Mom? I'm tired of you always dramatizing everything. Cordelia and I work our asses off. The kids are growing up and we can't even afford a decent vacation. So yes, I took your money. Big deal. Your joints will ache for a couple of months. You won't fall apart. But the doctor said I could lose mobility. Doctors always scare you to get more money out of you. You've lived 67 years. Your treatment can wait. I was choking with indignation and pain. Mitch, that's all my savings. How could you? Listen. My son's voice took on a metallic tone. I'm tired of this conversation. We'll come back and decide what to do about your treatment then. Now leave me alone, okay? I'm on vacation. Mitch. Your treatment is not my problem right now, he snapped and hung up. I sat there clutching the phone, unable to believe what I had heard. My son, my boy, whom I had raised alone after my husband's death, to whom I had given everything, in whom I had invested my soul. He had stolen my money. He had stolen my health. He had stolen my future. Tears streamed down my face, and I didn't even try to wipe them away. $15,000, everything I had, gone, turned into cocktails on the beach and jet skis. The phone slipped from my weakened fingers and fell to the floor with a dull thud. I didn't notice. I stared out the window at the gray Whitestown sky and thought about how I didn't know my son at all. I didn't leave the house for 3 days. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't open the curtains. The pain in my joints intensified, but now it seemed insignificant compared to the pain in my heart. My son's betrayal was physically palpable, like a blow to the gut that left me gasping for air. On the 4th day, there was a persistent knock at the door. I wanted to ignore it, but the knocking didn't stop. When I finally opened the door, there stood Enid Wickfield, my best friend since school. "My goodness, Bertha, you look terrible," she said bluntly as she came inside. "I've been trying to call you for 2 days. What's going on?" Enid went straight to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and began taking groceries out of her bag. Bread, cheese, apples. She had always been like that, practical and decisive. She never waited to be asked to help. She just did what she thought needed to be done. "I thought you were sick," she continued, cutting the cheese. "But now I see it's something else. Tell me." And I told her. About the arthritis, about the money, about Mitch and his vacation, about his terrible words. Tears streamed down my cheeks again, but this time they weren't from shock, but from bitterness and resentment. Enid listened without interrupting. Only at the most emotional moments did she squeeze my hand or shake her head. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, then said, "You know, Bertha, I've never told you this, but your Mitch was always a spoiled egoist. You did too much for him. You never loved him." I tried to defend my son out of old habit. "No, I loved him because you loved him, but I wasn't blinded by maternal feelings and saw how he grew up. Remember when he was 14 and you were saving up for a new washing machine? And he begged you to buy him a guitar because he suddenly decided he wanted to be a rock star." I remembered. The washing machine had broken down completely and I had to wash everything by hand. But Mitch begged so much, he talked so beautifully about his dream. I bought him a guitar, an expensive brand name one. 2 months later, it was gathering dust in the corner and I continued washing by hand for another 6 months to save up for a new machine. Or when he was 18 and you gave him the money you had saved for roof repair so he could go to Europe with his friends. Yes, that too. I believe that youth is a time for adventure, that you can't deprive your son of the opportunity to see the world. And then I spent the whole winter putting buckets under the leaks in the roof. "Bertha, understand," Enid poured me more tea. "It's not just about the money. It's that Mitch never appreciated your sacrifices. He took them for granted, and he still does." I was silent. My friend's words were painful but true. Mitch always got what he wanted, and I was always willing to give him everything I had to make him happy. "What am I going to do now?" I asked. "I don't have money for treatment, and it looks like I won't be able to get it back either." "First, you need to eat and get yourself cleaned up," Enid was adamant. "Second, we need to talk to Orville. He's a practical man. He might have some advice." Orville Dunn had lived next door for over 20 years. He had been widowed around the same time as me, and since then, we had occasionally helped each other out around the house. He fixed leaky faucets and jammed locks, and I sometimes cooked dinner for him or baked pies. Nothing romantic, just good neighborly relations. Enid called him, and half an hour later, Orville was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping tea and listening intently to the story of my son's betrayal. "What a bastard," was all he said when I finished. His usually good-natured face became hard. "I'm sorry, Bertha, but your son acted like a complete scoundrel. What should I do now?" I repeated my question. "You could take him to court," Orville suggested. "But it's fraud. He tricked you out of your money." I shook my head. "No, I won't go to court. I don't want to air our family problems in public. Besides, the money was transferred voluntarily, and everything is above board. Then all you can do is wait for him to come back and demand your money back, said Orville. Maybe if the whole family puts pressure on him, you'll get something back. He's already spent it all, I said with a bitter smile. You haven't seen the photos. A private bungalow, water sports, expensive restaurants. Even if he wanted to, he'd be hard-pressed to pay anything back. We sat in silence, thinking about the situation. Finally, Enid said, Bertha, have you thought about it? Maybe it's time to review the will? I looked at her in surprise. What does the will have to do with it? Well, as far as I remember, Mitch is the sole heir in your will, Enid said cautiously. The house, the savings, everything goes to him. After what happened, maybe it's worth considering whether he deserves the inheritance. I never thought about it. Indeed, many years ago, shortly after my husband's death, I had drawn up a will naming Mitch as my sole heir. It seemed natural. Who else would I leave my property to but my only son? Maybe Enid is right, Orville agreed. Think about your grandchildren. Zoe and Flynn are innocent, and if Mitch gets everything, who knows if they'll ever see a penny of it. Besides, Enid added, it might make him think twice. If he finds out he lost his inheritance because of what he did, maybe it will teach him something. I wasn't sure. Punishing my son by disinheriting him? It seemed too cruel. On the other hand, wasn't he cruel when he took my last money and left me without medical care? I need to think about it, I said. It's a serious decision. Of course, think about it, Orville agreed. But don't drag it out. Who knows what else your son might come up with? After Enid and Orville left, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I tossed and turned in bed, going over episodes from Mitch's life in my mind. His childhood, his youth, his adult years. I looked for the moment when something went wrong, when my sweet, kind boy turned into a selfish, heartless man. Maybe I really did spoil him too much, always protected him from the consequences of his actions, always ready to help, even to my own detriment. In the morning, I woke up with a heavy head, but with a clear understanding. Enid and Orville were right. It was time to stop blindly believing in my son's goodness. It was time to protect myself and my grandchildren's future. I found the business card of Talbot Cranston, a lawyer he had given me several years ago when he was helping me with some paperwork for the house. I called and made an appointment. Cranston's office was located in an old building in the center of Whitestown. Inside, it smelled of furniture polish and old books. The lawyer himself, a thin man with a neatly trimmed gray beard, greeted me with a polite smile. Mrs. Holloway, it's good to see you again. How can I help you? I told him about the situation with Mitch and my decision to change the will. Cranston listened attentively, making notes in his notebook. You know, Mrs. Holloway, he said when I finished, I don't want to say I told you so, but do you remember our conversation 5 years ago? I vaguely remembered that conversation. At that time, Mitch had asked me for money for a down payment on a house he and Cordelia wanted to buy. It was a significant amount, and I decided to consult with Cranston about the legal aspects of such a loan. You advised me to put everything in writing, I recalled. To draw up a loan agreement. Exactly. The lawyer nodded. And I also warned you that family financial relationships often lead to conflict, especially if one party is used to only taking and not giving. I remained silent. At the time, I thought Cranston was being overly cynical. Mitch was my son, and I trusted him unconditionally. Why would you need formalities between family members? However, that's not the issue right now, the lawyer continued. You want to change the will. Let's discuss what changes you would like to make. We spent almost 2 hours discussing various options. Cranston suggested legal solutions, and I weighed them in terms of fairness and concern for my grandchildren. In the end, we came to the following agreement. My house will remain in my possession until my death, and then it will be sold. 30% of the proceeds from the sale will go to a charitable foundation that helps elderly people with arthritis. The remaining 70%, as well as all my savings, will be placed in an educational trust fund for Zoe and Flynn. The money will be given to them to pay for college and other educational needs, and they will only be able to access the remainder when they reach the age of 25. Mitch received nothing. Are you sure you want to completely exclude your son from your will? Cranston asked. This could lead to a legal battle after your death. He could contest the will. Let him contest it. I was firm in my decision. You'll have all the evidence of his actions. Besides, I'm not excluding him completely. He's Zoe and Flynn's father, and if anything happens to them, the money from the trust fund will go back to me and then to him. But I don't want him to have direct access to that money. I've seen how he handles finances. Cranston nodded and began drafting the documents. While he worked, I looked around the office. Antique bookcases, leather armchairs, photographs on the walls. One caught my eye. A black and white snapshot of an elderly couple in front of the very house where the office was now located. Those are my parents, Cranston said, noticing my gaze. My father was a lawyer like me. My mother was a housewife. They were together for 52 years until my father passed away. They were a beautiful couple, I said sincerely. Yes, they were special. They taught me everything I know about justice. Cranston smiled at the memory. You know, my father often said, being a lawyer means defending those who cannot defend themselves. I try to follow that principle. Defending naive old ladies like me? Not naive, Mrs. Holloway? Trusting. Those are different things. Naivety is stupidity. Trust is believing in the best in people. There's no shame in that. His words comforted me a little. For the last few days, I had been constantly berating myself for believing Mitch so easily, for being so stupid as to give him my money. But maybe it wasn't my stupidity, but his meanness? Cranston finished with the documents and handed them to me to sign. I read each line slowly, realizing the seriousness of the moment. This wasn't just a change in a legal document. It was an admission of the bitter truth about my son, an admission that he didn't deserve my unconditional trust and love. What now? I asked, signing the last page. Now I'll register the will with the appropriate authorities and it will take effect, Cranston explained. Your previous document will be automatically revoked. You will receive a copy in a few days. Will Mitch find out about this? Not from me. The contents of the will are confidential until the testator's death. But if you decide to tell him yourself, that is your right. I wasn't sure I wanted to tell Mitch about my decision. On the one hand, it could be a lesson for him. On the other hand, it could provoke a new conflict, and I didn't have the strength for that anymore. I'll think about it, I said. When I left Cranston's office, it was drizzling outside. Typical fall weather for Whitestown. I didn't bring an umbrella, but for some reason the rain didn't bother me. On the contrary, the drops on my face felt cleansing, washing away the accumulated pain and resentment. I walked slowly, thinking over my decision. Was it the right one? Was it too cruel? Was I being as selfish as Mitch, thinking only of my own hurt feelings? But then I remembered the faces of Zoe and Flynn. Their future was now secure. They would have the opportunity to study, develop, and build their lives, even if their father spent all his money on entertainment. And some of the money would go to help elderly people with arthritis like me. It was fair. At home, I made some tea and felt a strange sense of calm for the first time in days. The pain of my son's betrayal hadn't gone away, but it had become dull and distant, like an old wound in rainy weather. I had done what I had to do. I had protected myself and my grandchildren's future. And maybe I had taught Mitch a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life. The phone rang, distracting me from my thoughts. It was Enid. Well, did you do it? She asked without preamble. Yes, I replied. The will has been changed. Mitch won't get a penny. And how do you feel? I paused for a moment. You know, it's strange, but I feel relieved. It's like I've lifted a heavy burden that I've been carrying for years. That's not a burden, Bertha. Those are your rose-colored glasses. You finally took them off and saw reality. Maybe Enid was right. Maybe I really did look at the world through the distorting lens of a mother's love for too long. For too long, I saw Mitch as the perfect son, blind to his flaws and selfishness. What are you going to do about treatment? Enid asked. I don't know yet. Maybe I'll sell some things. I have some family jewelry from my mother. It should be worth something. We'll figure something out, Enid said confidently. The main thing is that you've stopped blindly trusting someone who doesn't deserve it. After talking to my friend, I sat by the window for a long time, looking out at the wet street. A strange feeling came over me, a mixture of sadness and determination. I had lost my former image of my son, and it hurt. But at the same time, I had gained a new understanding of myself and my worth. I was no longer just Mitch's mom, willing to do anything for his happiness. I was Bertha Holloway, a woman who had lived a dignified life and deserved respect and care. And I had taken the first step toward earning that respect. 10 days passed. No calls, no messages from Mitch. I watched my son and his family's life through the photos Cordelia posted on social media every day. Bright sun, blue sea, happy faces. While I sat in my cold house with pain in my joints that was becoming unbearable, they were enjoying life on my money. My mother's family jewelry lay on the table in front of me, a gold necklace with a small emerald, several rings, a silver bracelet. Not very expensive, but priceless to me. My mother had given them to me before she died, and I had hoped to give them to Zoe one day. Now they could save my health. I found a pawn shop in the city center and took all the jewelry there. The money I got would be enough for the first course of treatment. Not all of it, but at least a start. Dr. Radley was delighted when I told her I could start therapy. "It's the right decision, Mrs. Holloway," she said. "There's no point in delaying treatment. You'll start to see results in 2 to 3 weeks." On the day I received my first injection of the new drug, Mitch and his family returned to Whitetown. I found out from Orville, who happened to see them unloading their suitcases from a taxi. "Tanned and rested," Orville said with undisguised contempt. "Your son even gave the porter a generous tip. Of course, it's easy to throw away other people's money. I expected Mitch to call or drop by right away. We hadn't parted on the best of terms, and I thought he should at least try to explain himself." But the phone remained silent. A day passed, then 2, then 3. No news from my son. On the 4th day after their return, there was a knock at the door. I opened it and saw Cordelia. She looked embarrassed and was holding a paper bag in her hands. "Hello, Bertha. Can I come in?" I stepped back silently, letting my daughter-in-law into the house. We went into the kitchen, where I silently put the kettle on. "I brought you something from the Bahamas," Cordelia said, holding out the bag. "It's local tea. They say it's very good for your joints." I looked at her, unable to hide my surprise. "Tea? You brought me tea instead of $15,000? Cordelia blushed and lowered her head. "Bertha, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know Mitch took your money." "How could you not know? You went to an expensive resort together. Mitch said he got a big bonus at work, and that you lent him some of your savings, but voluntarily. I had no idea it was all your money set aside for medical treatment." I looked closely at my daughter-in-law. She looked genuinely upset. "When did you find out the truth?" "Yesterday," Cordelia sighed. "Zoe overheard Orville telling our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, what had happened. She came home in tears and demanded an explanation. Mitch tried to deny it, but I could see from his face that Zoe was right. We had a big fight." I poured some tea and sat down across from Cordelia. "Where's Mitch now?" "At work. He doesn't know I'm here," she said, nervously twirling her cup. "Bertha, I'm so ashamed. If I had known, I would never have agreed to this trip." "I believe you," I said after a pause. "You've always been an honest girl." "We'll pay the money back," Cordelia said confidently. "I insisted that Mitch take out a loan. It'll take some time, but we'll pay it all back." I nodded, not really believing her promises. Mitch would probably find a way out, as he always did. "How's your treatment going?" "I started the course. I pawned my mother's jewelry." My sister-in-law turned pale. "Oh my God, Bertha. The ones you wanted to give to Zoe?" "The ones you wanted to give to Zoe. But it's okay. Health is more important." Cordelia stood up abruptly and hugged me. "Forgive us. I'm so ashamed." I awkwardly patted her on the back. I felt sorry for Cordelia. She always seemed like a decent woman. Apparently, Mitch knew how to hide his true nature, not only from his mother, but also from his wife. After Cordelia left, I felt a strange emptiness. All those days I was angry with my son, but deep down I hoped he would come, explain himself, apologize, that it was all some kind of ridiculous misunderstanding. But Cordelia's visit confirmed that Mitch had deliberately deceived me and didn't even think it necessary to apologize. The next few days passed in relative calm. I went to my appointments, did housework, and met with Enid. Gradually, news of Mitch's actions spread throughout Whitehaven. It's a small town and everyone knows everything. At the pharmacy, the pharmacist shook her head sympathetically as she handed me my medication. At the supermarket, the cashier offered to help me carry my bags. Even the postman, who was usually taciturn, stopped to chat and asked how I was feeling. One evening, the phone rang. I wasn't going to answer. I figured it was Enid again with another suggestion to go to the movies or an exhibition to take my mind off things. But something made me pick up the phone. Bertha, this is Linda Stone. Linda was the wife of Mitch's boss, Howard Stone. We had met at a few corporate parties but were never particularly close. Hello, Linda. How can I help you? I'm calling to say how sorry I am. Howard told me what Mitch did with your money. That's terrible. Thanks for your sympathy, I said, not knowing what else to say. Howard is very upset. He always thought of Mitch as a reliable employee. Now, of course, he can't look at him the same way. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to discuss my son with strangers, no matter how sympathetic they were. Anyway, Linda continued, if you need anything, just let us know. Howard and I would be happy to help. I'm fine, Linda. I'm managing. Yes, Howard said you found a way to pay for the treatment. And that you changed your will. Very wise of you. I froze. What did you say? About your will. Howard said you took Mitch out and left everything to your grandchildren. I think that's the right thing to do. How does Howard know about the will? Linda paused for a moment, clearly embarrassed. Oh, I thought you knew. Howard heard it from Jonathan Baker. You're friends with his mother, Diana, aren't you? Diana Baker was indeed a longtime acquaintance of mine. We sometimes played bridge together at the local club. Her son, Jonathan, worked at City Hall in the records department. I immediately realized what had happened. Jonathan had seen my new will and told his mother, who had shared the news with her friends. Linda, I have to go. Thanks for calling. I hung up, my heart pounding. So the whole town already knew that I had disinherited my son, and Mitch had probably heard about it too. I glanced involuntarily at the front door. Was it locked? But Mitch didn't show up that evening or the next day. I had almost convinced myself that everything would be all right when, on Saturday morning, the screech of brakes rang out in the driveway. Looking out the window, I saw my son's car, carelessly parked right on the lawn. Mitch jumped out and walked quickly toward the house. I barely had time to step away from the window when the front door swung open. Mitch never bothered to knock. Mom! His voice echoed through the house. Where are you? I walked into the hall, trying to look calm. Hello, Mitch. My son looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were red, and he had stubble on his cheeks. He didn't look like the happy vacationer in the photos. Is it true? He stepped toward me, waving his arms. Did you cut me out of your will? Yes, I replied simply. You vindictive old woman, Mitch shouted. How could you? I'm your only son. And I'm your only mother, I said quietly. That didn't stop you from stealing my money and leaving me without medical care. I didn't steal anything. You transferred it to my account yourself, because you promised to add the missing amount and pay for my treatment. Instead, you spent it all on your vacation. Mitch ran his hand nervously through his hair. Okay, I admit it was wrong. I got carried away. But to disinherit me? That's too much. I didn't disinherit you, Mitch, I said. I just made sure that my money would go towards your children's education, not your entertainment. You have no right to do this. Mitch paced the room like a caged animal. This house belonged to my father. It should go to me. Your father would want his grandchildren to have a decent education. The house will be sold eventually, and Zoe and Flynn will get some of the money anyway. And what do I get? Mitch stopped right in front of me, his face contorted with anger. Nothing? After everything I've done for you? I couldn't help but laugh. What exactly have you done for me, Mitch? Remind me, please. I visited you. I invited you to the holidays. I let you see your grandchildren. Oh, how generous. You let me see my own grandchildren. I shook my head. What about everything I did for you? I raised you on my own, put you through school, helped you with the down payment on your house, Looked after the kids when you and Cordelia wanted a break. And how did you thank me? You stole my last savings. I'll pay you back every damn penny, Mitch shouted. Cordelia made me take out a loan. You'll get your 15,000, but I want you to change your will immediately. No, I said, calmer than I had ever been. It's not about the money, Mitch. It's about trust. I no longer believe you will handle my inheritance responsibly. You're doing this to spite me. Mitch grabbed a vase from the table and threw it against the wall with all his might. Shards flew across the room. You've always been like this, always controlling, always telling me how to live my life. I looked at the broken vase, a gift from my husband on our 10th anniversary, and felt a strange sense of calm. It was as if I were watching a scene from a movie, not my own life. Get out of my house, Mitch. What? I said get out. You broke the vase your father gave me. You stole my money. You yell at me and insult me. I don't have to put up with this. Mom! Mitch suddenly changed his tone to a pleading one. Let's talk calmly. I got carried away. I'm sorry. But you have to understand this will is very important to me. It's my future. No, Mitch. It's my property, and I'll dispose of it as I see fit. And now I'm asking you to leave. You'll regret this, he hissed, returning to his threatening tone. I'll prove you're incompetent, that you're out of your mind. Go ahead, I shrugged. Dr. Radley has all the medical reports on my condition. I have arthritis, not dementia. Mitch stood with his fists clenched, his face red with rage. I could see him struggling with himself, trying to come up with new arguments or threats. This is all about the money, isn't it? He finally said. You're getting back at me for taking your vacation money. No, Mitch, I shook my head. I didn't change my will. You chose the money over me. I just honored your choice. Those words seemed to hit him physically. He took a step back, looking at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. What did you say? You made a choice, Mitch. When you decided to take my money instead of helping with my treatment, you showed that you value your pleasures more than my health, more than our family. I've simply accepted that fact and am acting accordingly. Mitch opened his mouth to say something but couldn't get a word out. He stood there staring at me with a shocked look, as if he couldn't believe that his gentle, forgiving mother was capable of such harshness. Finally, he turned and left, slamming the door loudly behind him. A minute later, I heard the roar of his car as it sped away. I slowly sank into a chair, feeling my hands tremble. The confrontation had drained all my strength. But for the first time in a long time, I felt that I had done the right thing, that I hadn't allowed myself to be intimidated or manipulated, that I had finally told my son the truth, bitter but necessary. After our argument, there was silence. Mitch didn't call or come by. I only heard news about him from Cordelia, who occasionally stopped by with her grandchildren. From her, I learned that my son was deeply depressed, hardly spoke at home, and was staying late at work more often. He's changed, Bertha, Cordelia said during one of her visits. He's become withdrawn and irritable. I tried to talk to him about what happened, but he just explodes. I just nodded, not feeling much sympathy. My treatment was progressing slowly but surely. Dr. Radley was pleased with the initial results. The inflammation in my joints was beginning to subside, and the pain was less intense. I was already able to button my buttons on my own and even tried my hand at knitting again. Weeks passed. One early December morning, there was a knock at the door. I opened it and saw Mitch, pale and gaunt, but in an immaculate suit and carrying a bouquet of my favorite lilies. Mom, he smiled uncertainly. Can I come in? I stepped aside silently, letting him into the house. He went into the kitchen, put the flowers on the table, and looked around as if he were seeing the room for the first time. How's your health? He asked, sitting down at the table. Better, I replied curtly. The treatment is helping. That's good, Mitch nodded. I'm glad. There was an awkward pause. I didn't rush to break the silence, waiting for my son to get to the point of his visit. Mom, he finally said, I came to apologize. What I did was unforgivable. I was selfish, thinking only of myself. Taking your money and leaving you without treatment was a terrible thing to do. I looked at him closely, trying to see sincerity in his eyes. But something made me wary. Perhaps it was his overly rehearsed intonation or his calculated gestures. I've been thinking a lot these past few weeks, Mitch continued, about what kind of son I am, about how you've always taken care of me, and I didn't appreciate it. He took an envelope out of his jacket's inside pocket and placed it on the table. Here's $5,000. It's the first part of what I owe you. I took out a loan, just like Cordelia promised. I'll pay you $5,000 a month until I've paid it all back. I looked at the envelope but didn't take it. Why are you doing this, Mitch? What do you mean, why? He looked puzzled. I told you, I want to make amends. Is that all? Mom, Mitch sighed. You always read me like an open book. Yes, I hope you'll reconsider your decision about the will. But that's not the only reason. I'm truly sorry. I was silent, studying my son. In 42 years, I had learned all the little gestures that gave him away when he was lying. The slight twitch of the corner of his mouth, the habit of rubbing his left ear, the overly direct gaze. All of these signs were present now. I don't believe you, Mitch, I said finally. You're not sorry. You're afraid of losing your inheritance. Mom, he exclaimed indignantly. How can you say that? Because it's true. If you were really sorry, you would have come right after you got back from vacation. But you only showed up now, when you found out about the change in the will. Mitch opened his mouth to argue, but I raised my hand to stop him. And even now, you didn't come empty-handed. You brought money and flowers. You're trying to buy forgiveness. That's not fair. Mitch jumped up, knocking over the table. I'm trying to make things right. No, I shook my head. You're trying to fix the consequences, not the cause. You don't understand that the problem isn't the money, it's your attitude toward me. I watched my son's face change, the mask of remorse slipping away to reveal his true emotions. Anger, disappointment, impatience. What do you want from me? He hissed. I came to apologize and bring you money. What else do you want? Sincerity, Mitch, but you don't seem capable of that. He grabbed the envelope from the table and shoved it back into his pocket. You know what? Forget it. I tried to make up, but you're too stubborn. If you don't want the money, don't take it. If you don't want to forgive me, that's your right. But don't expect me to grovel at your feet. With that, he stormed out of the kitchen. A moment later, the front door slammed, and I was left alone with a bouquet of lilies that began to slowly fall onto the table. That evening, Cordelia called. Her voice sounded tense. Bertha, Mitch came home furious. Did something happen? I told her about his visit and my reaction. I understand, Cordelia said after a pause. He's not really sorry. He just wants his place in the will back. You're not angry with me for not accepting his apology? No. She sighed into the phone. To be honest, I'm tired of his hypocrisy. The last few weeks have been difficult. I felt a sense of alarm. Cordelia, are you all right? Not really, she said quietly, as if afraid of being overheard. Mitch has changed. Or maybe I've just finally seen him for who he really is. He's become irritable and often lashes out at the children. Yesterday, he yelled at Flynn for breaking a glass. The boy cried until midnight. My heart ached. My grandchildren shouldn't have to suffer because of their father's mistakes. I'm thinking about divorce, Cordelia confessed. I've already consulted a lawyer. This revelation took me by surprise. Despite all of Mitch's flaws, I never thought their marriage was in jeopardy. Are you sure? I asked cautiously. Maybe it's just a rough patch. It's not just the money, Cordelia said. She just opened my eyes to what my husband is really like. Selfish, irresponsible, willing to betray even those closest to him for his own gain. I don't want my children to grow up like that. After that conversation, I often thought about Cordelia and my grandchildren. I wanted to help them, but I didn't know how. It seemed wrong to interfere in my son and daughter-in-law's relationship. The solution came unexpectedly. A week after our conversation, Zoe showed up at my door after school. Grandma, can I stay with you? She asked, clutching her scarf. It's hard at home. I hugged my granddaughter and took her to the kitchen. While I was making cocoa, Zoe told me that her parents were constantly arguing, that her father often came home late and in a bad mood, and that Flynn was afraid of him and hid in his room. Mom says we're moving soon, Zoe said, staring into her cup. Without Dad. How do you feel about that? I asked cautiously. Zoe shrugged. I don't know, I'm sad. But when Dad's home, it's even worse. He's changed, Grandma. We used to play together a lot. He helped me with my homework, told me funny stories. Now he just yells and gets angry. I stroked my granddaughter's head, not knowing what to say. How do you explain the complexity of adult relationships to a 15-year-old girl? Do you know what happened between your father and me? I asked. Zoe nodded. Yes. Mom told me. Dad took your money for my treatment and spent it on a vacation. And what do you think about that? Zoe was silent for a long time, then looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I think he did a terrible thing. You're his mother. You've always been kind to us. And he just stole from you. I hugged my granddaughter, and we sat there for a long time without saying a word. From that day on, Zoe became a frequent guest in my home. She would come after school, do her homework at my kitchen table, and sometimes stay overnight. I could see that she felt calmer here, away from her family conflicts. Gradually, we found common ground. Zoe was interested in history, especially the 60s and 70s, and enjoyed listening to my stories about my youth. I showed her old photographs and vinyl records that I kept in the attic. She helped me around the house, cooking simple meals, watering the flowers, and when I felt better, we worked together in the garden. Once, while sorting through a box of old things, Zoe found my knitting needles. Can you knit, Grandma? She asked with interest. I used to, I said, showing her my hands. But arthritis makes it difficult. Although now, with treatment, it's getting better. Will you teach me? Zoe asked unexpectedly. I think it's cool to create something with your own hands. And so we started knitting lessons. At first it was difficult. My fingers still didn't work properly, and Zoe was impatient and quickly became frustrated when something didn't work out. But gradually things started to improve. By Christmas, she had knitted a simple scarf for Flynn, and the joy on her face when her brother enthusiastically accepted the gift was worth all the effort. Cordelia told me that she had indeed filed for divorce. Mitch resisted at first, threatening to take the children, but then unexpectedly agreed to all the terms, including substantial alimony. It was strange. He usually fought for every dollar. The answer came in mid-January when a small article appeared in the local newspaper about a financial scandal at the insurance company where Mitch worked. One of the risk assessors, his name was not mentioned, had been caught embezzling a large contract which had resulted in significant losses for the company. That same evening, Cordelia called and confirmed my suspicions. It was Mitch. He had been fired without severance pay, and the company was considering legal action. He's desperate, Cordelia said. He says it's unfair that he was set up, but I saw the documents. It was his signature. What will he do? I don't know. He's staying in a cheap motel outside of town. He has almost no money. It all went to vacation and loans. I'm letting him see the kids on weekends, but Zoe refuses, and Flynn will only see him if I'm there. I felt a strange mixture of emotions. On the one hand, I felt sorry for my son, losing his job, his family, the respect of his colleagues. On the other hand, it seemed like he got what he deserved for his actions. A week later, Mitch showed up at my door. He looked even worse than last time. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes were sunken, and he had an unhealthy complexion. Mom, I need your help, he said without preamble, walking into the house. I silently followed him into the living room. Mitch sat down in an armchair, wrapping his arms around his head. I'm in deep shit. I lost my job. Cordelia filed for divorce. I have no money. Soon, I'll be kicked out of the motel for not paying. How can I help? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I need money. Mitch looked up at me. Just enough to get by until I find a new job. At least a couple thousand. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Where was the confident, successful man I knew? Sitting in front of me was a broken man who had lost everything. I don't have that kind of money, Mitch, I said truthfully. Everything I had went to pay for your treatment. But you get your pension! His voice took on a pleading tone. And the house is paid off. You could take out a loan against it. I'm not going to risk the roof over my head for your debts, I replied firmly. You're a grown man, Mitch. Get a job. It may not be as prestigious as before, but something that will allow you to pay for your living expenses. You don't understand. He jumped up. With my reputation, no one will hire me at a decent company. Work as a cashier or a mover. That's beneath me. When you have nothing to eat, dignity is the last thing on your mind, I remarked. Mitch paced the room, then stopped abruptly. What about the $5,000 I offered to give you back? You refused it. Where is it? I felt myself blushing. I didn't want to tell him, but I had no choice. I donated it to a charity fund for elderly people with arthritis. Mitch stared at me as if he couldn't believe his ears. You… what? You heard me. I gave the money to the fund. It will do more good there than if I just took it back. You gave my money to strangers? Mitch roared. When your own son is on the brink of poverty? It wasn't your money, I reminded him. It was my money that you stole and then tried to get back in part to restore your place in the will. Mitch looked at me as if he wanted to hit me. I had never seen such rage in his eyes before and instinctively stepped back. You never loved me, he hissed through clenched teeth. You always just controlled me, told me what to do, criticized me. And now that you have the chance to destroy me completely, you're happy to take it. That's not true, Mitch. I shook my head. I loved you more than anything in the world. I gave you everything I had, my time, my strength, my money. But you took it for granted, never appreciated it, always wanted more. You're lying, he shouted. If you love me, you would help me now. I'm not going to indulge your irresponsible behavior, I said calmly. That's not love, Mitch. Real love isn't just about giving, it's also about demanding. Demanding to be better, to be honest, to take responsibility for your actions. Mitch looked at me with hatred. So that's how it is? No help? I can offer you a place to stay until you find a job, I said, but I won't give you any money. Live with you? He snorted contemptuously. In this dump? No thanks. I'd rather sleep in my car. He headed for the door but turned back at the doorway. You'll regret this, Mom. When things get worse, when you can't take care of yourself, remember this day. Remember how you refused to help your own son. How could you refuse to help your own mother? I asked quietly. Mitch didn't answer. The door slammed and I was left alone, feeling strangely empty. Despite everything he had done, part of me still loved him, still cared about him. But another part, the more rational, more honest part, understood that helping him now would mean continuing the vicious cycle. He had to find a way out on his own, fix his own mistakes. That evening, Cordelia called and said that Mitch was demanding money from her and threatening to take the children away if she didn't help him. I advised her to consult a lawyer and document all his threats. The divorce promised to be complicated. Zoe started spending even more time with me. Now she often stayed for the whole weekend, helping with cleaning, cooking, and gardening. Sometimes she brought Flynn along. The boy was quiet and withdrawn, but he gradually thawed in my home, where no one shouted or threatened him. The treatment was progressing well. By spring, I was able to do most of my daily tasks on my own, and the pain had decreased so much that I often forgot about it. Dr. Radley was pleased with the results. You're doing great, Mrs. Holloway, she said during her next visit. One more course and we can move on to maintenance therapy. Is it cheaper? I asked hopefully. The money from selling my jewelry was running out. Significantly, the doctor smiled, and it's covered by your insurance. That was good news. I would be able to continue my treatment without further financial sacrifice. I hadn't heard from Mitch in several weeks. Cordelia said he had found some work in a neighboring town and wasn't bothering them anymore. The divorce was moving forward, albeit slowly due to Mitch's constant delays. And then, at the end of April, he showed up at my doorstep again. He looked better, clean clothes, a haircut, and the old sparkle in his eyes. Mom, he smiled as if there had never been any conflict between us. Can I come in? I led him into the house, watching the sudden change warily. You look good, I remarked. Yeah, things are looking up. Mitch slumped down on the sofa. I found a job at a car dealership. It's not what I'm used to, of course, but the pay is good. I rented an apartment and bought a used car. I'm happy for you, I said sincerely. I came to apologize. Mitch looked at me with the same remorseful expression as last time, for how I behaved. For the threats. I wasn't myself, you understand? Losing my job, the divorce, it all hit me at once. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. And he did. Now that I've gotten back on my feet, I want to make things right. I want to repair my relationship with you and the children. I want to start with a clean slate. And the will? I asked bluntly. Mitch hesitated, then laughed nervously. Well, of course, I'd be happy if you reconsidered it. After all, I'm your only son. Mitch, I shook my head, you haven't learned anything. It's the same old manipulation, the same old attempts to get what you want without caring about others. What? No! He feigned sincere indignation. I really want to make things right. Start by paying the child support you owe Cordelia, I said. Spend time with your children, not because it gives you the right to demand anything from me, but because they need a father. Live honestly, work hard. Prove with your actions, not your words, that you've changed. Mitch looked at me, and I saw the mask of kindness slip from his face. You'll never forgive me, will you? You'll never give me back my place in the will? It's not about forgiveness, Mitch. It's about trust. I no longer believe you will handle the inheritance responsibly. But your grandchildren will get their share, I guarantee it. Grandchildren, charity, he sneered. Everything but your own son. You made your choice, Mitch, I reminded him, when you decided to spend my money on vacations instead of my treatment. He stood up, clenching his fists. You know what? To hell with it all. I tried to be polite, I tried to apologize, but you're incorrigible. Your stubbornness, your vindictiveness, that's what destroyed our family. No, Mitch, I said, standing up too. Your greed and selfishness destroyed our family. And until you admit that, nothing will change. Goodbye, Mom, he said, heading for the door. You'll never see me again. I didn't stop him. I knew his threats were empty. He'd come back when he needed money or help again, and he'd play the role of the repentant son once more. But I wouldn't fall for that trick again. When the door closed behind Mitch, I didn't feel bitter but strangely relieved. It was as if I had finally been freed from a heavy burden, the need to believe in something that wasn't true. My son was not a good person. And admitting it, strange as it may seem, was easier than continuing to deceive myself. I sat by the window, looking at the spring garden, where the first flowers were already blooming. Life went on. My life. And for the first time in a long time, I thought about the future with hope instead of fear. May was unusually warm. I spent a lot of time in the garden, watching nature come back to life after a long winter. My joints had strengthened noticeably thanks to the treatment. I could hold garden tools without much effort, dig small holes for seedlings, and trim the bushes. But without Enid's help, I wouldn't have been able to continue my therapy. When the money from the jewelry sales ran out and I had one more course of treatment left before switching to maintenance therapy, it was Enid who found a solution. There's a support program in our town for seniors with chronic illnesses, she told me when she stopped by one morning. I spoke to the coordinator, Mrs. Flanagan. She said you might be eligible for a grant, especially given your situation. My situation? Well, you know. Enid hesitated. An elderly woman, limited means, arthritis, financial abuse from relatives. Did you tell them about Mitch? I was shocked. Just the basics, my friend hastened to reassure me. No names or specific details, but it's important, Bertha. Your case is exactly what this program is designed for. I hesitated. Seeking charity seemed humiliating. I had managed on my own my entire life and was proud of my independence. Think about your grandchildren, Enid reminded me gently. If you don't finish your treatment, the pain will return. You won't be able to knit with Zoe or work in the garden with Flynn again. That argument convinced me. I agreed to apply, and 2 weeks later I received approval for full funding for the remainder of my treatment. See? Enid said triumphantly when I told her the news. Sometimes you just have to let others help you. Every day I felt better and better. Dr. Radley was impressed with my progress. Your body is responding very well to the therapy, she said during one of my visits. The inflammation is almost completely gone, and your joint mobility has improved by 80%. If we continue in the same vein, you will be able to return to a virtually normal life. We hadn't heard from Mitch in almost 2 months. Cordelia stopped by occasionally with the kids, and said that the divorce was moving forward, although Mitch was constantly creating obstacles. He was still working at the car dealership, but according to rumors, he was often in conflict with his colleagues and management. In early June, Zoe graduated from ninth grade with honors. I attended the ceremony with Cordelia and Flynn. Mitch wasn't there. Zoe hadn't invited him. He wouldn't have come anyway, she said with feigned indifference, but I could see the pain in her eyes. After the ceremony, we had a small party in my garden. Cordelia prepared a barbecue, Flynn helped with the serving, and Zoe showed off her awards. Enid and Orville came over and brought homemade lemonade and strawberry pie. It was a warm, joyful day filled with laughter and kind words. I looked at the people gathered around the table and thought about how my life had changed over the past 6 months. Yes, I had lost trust in my son, but I had gained a deeper connection with my grandchildren, strengthened my friendship with Enid and Orville, and learned to accept help from others. Perhaps that was where true value lay, not in blood ties, but in sincere human relationships. The next morning, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Mrs. Holloway?" asked a formal male voice. "My name is Warren Page, and I'm with the law firm Page, Hendricks and Partners. We need to meet with you regarding an important matter." "What matter?" I was wary. "I'd prefer to discuss it in person." "How about 3 o'clock today at our office?" I agreed, although my gut feeling told me that nothing good would come of this meeting. The law firm's office was located in a modern glass building in the business center of Whitestown. Warren Page was younger than I had expected, about 35, impeccably dressed, with perfectly coiffed hair. "Mrs. Holloway, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I won't beat around the bush. I represent your son, Mitchell Holloway, in the case to have you declared legally incompetent." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What?" "Your son is concerned about your mental state," Page said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "He says that in recent months you have been exhibiting signs of paranoia, unreasonable suspicion, and making strange financial decisions. He believes that you are no longer capable of managing your own affairs and need a guardian." "That's absurd." My voice trembled with indignation. "I am in perfect health, and my doctor can confirm that." "I'm glad to hear that." Page smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "However, my client has provided evidence from several people who have noticed changes in your behavior. In addition, your decision to exclude your only son from your will and transfer a significant portion of your estate to a charitable foundation could be seen as a sign of irrational thinking." I looked at the lawyer, trying to make sense of what was happening. Mitch had decided to declare me insane in order to get his inheritance back. It was so low, so despicable, that it took my breath away. "Mr. Page," I finally said, "I'm not going to discuss this with you. I'll contact my lawyer." "As you wish," he said, handing me the folder. "Here is a copy of the court filing. The hearing is scheduled for June 23rd. I advise you to prepare well." I left the office on shaky legs. One thought ran through my head. How could my own son sink so low? When I got home, I immediately called Talbot Cranston and told him what had happened. The lawyer listened carefully, asked a few questions, and assured me that he would take the case. "Don't worry, Mrs. Holloway," he said. "Cases like this are not uncommon, especially when it comes to inheritance. But your son has no real grounds for his claim. We will easily prove your legal capacity." How could he even think that would work? I wondered. "Desperation," Cranston replied simply. "People tend to grasp at straws when they're backed into a corner." The next 2 weeks were spent preparing for the hearing. Cranston gathered documents, testimonials, and medical reports. I underwent an independent psychiatric evaluation, which confirmed that I was of sound mind and had no mental disorders. Enid and Orville were outraged when they learned of Mitch's plan. "That guy has completely lost his conscience," Orville said angrily, "declaring his own mother insane for money. He couldn't sink any lower." But the hardest blow came from where Mitch least expected it. When Cordelia found out about his plan, she came to me with the firm intention of helping. "I'll testify on your behalf, Bertha," she said, "and the children will too. At least Zoe will definitely agree. Flynn is too young for court, but we can provide a written statement from him." "You don't have to do that," I said, touched by her support. It could complicate your divorce. It's already complicated, Cordelia shrugged. But there are things more important than legal procedures, like justice. The day of the hearing was hot. The courtroom was almost empty. Only the participants, their representatives, and a few onlookers. I noticed Diana Baker in the corner, obviously there to gather material for the local gossip. Mitch sat at the defense table with Warren Page. He avoided looking in my direction, poring over some papers. He looked tense and nervous. Judge Ramirez, an elderly woman with a piercing gaze, began the hearing at exactly 10 o'clock. We are gathered here to consider the petition of Mr. Mitchell Holloway to have his mother, Bertha Holloway, declared incompetent and to be appointed guardian of her person and property, she announced. Mr. Page, you may present the grounds for this petition. Mitch's lawyer stood up and began a long speech about my allegedly deteriorating mental state. According to him, I was paranoid, falsely accused my son of theft, made irrational financial decisions, and changed my will under the influence of delusional ideas of persecution. Mrs. Holloway needs protection from herself, Page concluded. And who better to take care of a mother than her loving son? I could barely contain my laughter at this brazen lie. Cranston, noticing my state, patted my arm reassuringly. Mr. Cranston, it's your turn, said the judge. My lawyer stood up, straightened his jacket, and began his speech, calm, measured, and fact-based. Your Honor, Mr. Holloway's statement is not only unfounded, but it is also an attempt to defraud his mother of her property, he said. I have irrefutable evidence of Mrs. Holloway's full legal capacity. He presented the court with the results of an independent psychiatric evaluation, Dr. Radley's report on my physical health, and testimony from bank employees regarding my ability to manage my finances. Furthermore, Cranston continued, I would like to draw the court's attention to the real reason behind this statement. 6 months ago, Mr. Holloway fraudulently took possession of his mother's savings of $15,000, which had been set aside for her medical treatment. Instead of helping his mother, he spent the money on a vacation for his family. There was a murmur in the courtroom. Mitch turned pale and whispered something fiercely to his lawyer. Do you have any evidence to support that claim? Asked the judge. Yes, Your Honor, Cranston said, presenting bank statements confirming the transfer of money and subsequent expenditures. As you can see, the funds were withdrawn at a travel agency, hotels, and restaurants in the Bahamas. After this incident, Mrs. Holloway wisely decided to revise her will to protect the interests of her grandchildren and prevent the squandering of their inheritance by her irresponsible son. Judge Ramirez carefully studied the documents, then looked at Mitch. Mr. Holloway, would you like to comment on these statements? Mitch stood up, nervously fiddling with his tie. It was a misunderstanding, Your Honor. My mother gave me the money voluntarily, with no strings attached. Then she suddenly changed her mind and demanded it back. I had already started paying her back, but she refused to accept my payments. That's a lie, I blurted out. Mrs. Holloway, please. The judge looked at me sternly. You will have an opportunity to speak. Mr. Cranston, do you have any witnesses? Yes, Your Honor. I would like to call Cordelia Holloway, the plaintiff's wife. Mitch flinched as Cordelia rose from her seat and walked to the witness stand. After taking the oath, she clearly and concisely recounted everything she knew about the situation, how Mitch had deceived me, how he had spent the vacation money, how he had tried to hide it from her. And what is your opinion of Mrs. Holloway's mental state? Cranston asked. Berta is perfectly sane and rational, Cordelia said firmly. She thinks clearly, makes sound decisions, and cares for her grandchildren. If anyone is exhibiting irrational behavior, it is my husband. Page attempted to discredit Cordelia's testimony by implying that she was biased because of the divorce, but the judge quickly cut him off. The next witness was Zoe. The 15-year-old girl held herself with remarkable dignity as she talked about how she spends her time with me, how we knit together, work in the garden, and discuss books. My grandmother is the smartest person I know, she concluded. She never says anything bad about my father, even though she has every right to. She's just protecting herself and us from his irresponsibility. When Paige began to question her, Zoe looked straight at Mitch. Dad, why are you doing this? Is money more important than honor? Mitch looked away, unable to bear his daughter's direct question. After the testimony of Enid Orville and Dr. Radley, the court retired for deliberation. It lasted less than half an hour. When Judge Ramirez returned, her face was stern. Mr. Mitchell Holloway's petition to have his mother declared incompetent is denied as completely without merit, she announced. Furthermore, I consider this petition to be an attempt at fraud and abuse of the court system. Mr. Holloway, you should be grateful that your mother is not pressing charges of theft against you. If I were in her place, I would not be so generous. Mitch sat with his head bowed. Paige whispered something to him, but he didn't seem to hear. Court costs will be borne by the plaintiff, the judge concluded. The hearing is adjourned. As I left the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice had prevailed, and sadness at the realization that my son was lost to me forever. The next day, I returned to Talbot Cranston's office. I want to make some changes to the will, I said firmly. Again? The lawyer asked in surprise. What exactly do you want to change? I want to completely exclude Mitch from ever receiving a penny of my inheritance, even if something happens to my grandchildren, I explained. And I want to set up a charitable foundation in my name to help elderly people who have been victims of financial abuse by relatives. Cranston looked at me intently. Are you sure? This is quite a final decision. Absolutely sure, I nodded. After yesterday, I realized that Mitch will never change. He will always look for ways to get what he wants without regard for others. I can't let him ever have control over my money again. The lawyer nodded and began working on the new document. By the end of the day, everything was ready. A new will that completely excluded Mitch from any inheritance under any circumstances, and the founding documents for the Bertha Holloway Charitable Trust. Congratulations, Cranston said as I signed the last paper. You just made the world a little better. I smiled, feeling strangely at peace. All these months I had been fighting not only for my money or my health, but for a principle, for justice. And now finally I had won. July brought hot weather and a new phase in my life. I switched to maintenance therapy, which was much cheaper and covered by insurance. My health improved significantly. I could garden, knit, and cook without any problems. The pain didn't go away completely, but it became tolerable and didn't interfere with my daily life. Cordelia finalized her divorce and moved with her children to a new house a few blocks away from me. Zoe and Flynn still visited me often, especially on weekends. We worked in the garden together, baked cookies, and played board games. Those hours with my grandchildren became the most precious in my life. I didn't hear from Mitch for almost a month after the court case. Then he suddenly showed up at my door on a Sunday evening. He looked tired but sober and clean. "Mom, can I come in?" he asked without his usual confidence. I stepped aside silently and let him in. We went into the living room and sat down across from each other. "I came to apologize," Mitch began, looking at the floor. "What I did. Trying to have you declared incompetent. It was awful. I don't know what came over me." "Greed," I replied simply. "It drives many people to do despicable things." Mitch flinched but didn't argue. "Maybe you're right. I'm confused, Mom. I lost my job, my family, my children's respect. Everything fell apart. And you decided that getting my money would fix everything?" "Something like that," he smiled weakly. "Stupid, huh?" I didn't answer. We sat in silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock. "I'm leaving Whitehorse," Mitch finally said. "I found a job in Chicago, sales manager at a car dealership. It's not what I'm used to, but it's a start." "Good luck," I said sincerely. "I'd like to," he faltered. "I'd like to try to fix things, between us. I know I've done a lot of wrong, but you're still my mother." I looked closely at my son. Was this another manipulation or sincere remorse? I could no longer tell the difference. "Mitch," I said slowly, weighing each word, "blood ties don't make us a family. Family is those who stay by your side in difficult times. You made your choice. Now live with it." He looked at me with pain in his eyes, as if only now realizing the finality of our breakup. "So there's no going back?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Not right now. Maybe someday, if you really change. But I'm not going to wait for that, hope for it, or build my life around that hope anymore." Mitch nodded as he stood up. I understand. Well, goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Mitch, I said, not getting up to see him out. Take care of yourself. He left, quietly closing the door behind him. I sat in my chair, staring at the family photo on the wall. Mitch as a child, me, my late husband. We looked so happy, so full of hope. Who could have guessed that it would all end like this? On the last week of July, I turned 68. Enid insisted on throwing a party in my garden. Nothing fancy, she assured me. Just the closest family. But we have to celebrate this year. The year you finally gained your freedom. I agreed, though without much enthusiasm. Birthdays at my age are no longer a cause for celebration, but rather a reminder of the relentless passage of time. But the party turned out to be just what I needed. Enid decorated the garden with garlands and lanterns. Orville prepared a barbecue on the new grill that he and Enid had given me. Cordelia baked a cake. Zoe and Flynn made homemade cards and presented me with an album of photos of our new family, as they called it. We sat at a long table under an apple tree, eating, drinking, laughing, and reminiscing about funny stories. The sun slowly sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A warm breeze carried the scent of flowers and ripe fruit. At one point, I noticed movement by the hedge at the edge of the property. Looking closer, I saw Mitch. He was standing in the shade of the trees, watching our celebration. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw understanding in his eyes, understanding that he had lost something far more valuable than money or property. He had lost the right to be part of this moment, this happiness, this family. Mitch nodded slowly, as if accepting his defeat, and disappeared into the twilight. Here's to you, Bertha. Enid raised her glass. To your health, your wisdom, and your strength. To Grandma, her grandchildren chimed in. To our family, Cordelia added, hugging the children. I looked at these people, not related to me by blood, but who had become my real family, and felt my heart fill with warmth. The loss of my son had been painful, but it had opened my eyes to true values: honesty, loyalty, mutual support. At that moment, sitting in my blooming garden surrounded by people who truly cared about me, I realized that despite all the trials I had endured, I was happy. Truly happy.